I'm so happy to be here in Tel Aviv. Woo! My name is Kent C. Dodds, and I'm the Director of Developer Experience at Remix. And it was brought to my attention today that lots of you might think that I'm a front-end developer. So I'll just establish a little credibility and say that when I was working at PayPal, I shipped lots of Node code to millions of people all over the world. So I do know Node. And Remix, interestingly, tricked me into becoming more of a back-end developer than I already was, because I actually spend about half of my time writing back-end code in Node with Remix. So if you're thinking about Remix and it's like, oh, that's the front-end thing that all the front-end people are getting excited about. No. We're bringing all the front-end people back to Node or to any JavaScript runtime on the back end. And it's pretty sick what we can do, and we're going to be talking about that today. Before we get into it, though, I'd like to invite you all to stand up with me. If you're physically able and would like to, please do come stand up. We are going to, thank you so much. We are going to do a little bit of exercise to get the blood flowing, and this is important for our brains to be able to process what's going to happen today. So I want you to put your arms out in front of you and squat down and come back up. It's not that hard. You could do it. Okay, we're going to do 12 of these together. We're going to count out loud together. Ready? 1, 2, you got to count a little louder. 3, 4, 5, you're doing great. 6, 7, 8. You know, this is fun enough. Let's start over. 10. There we go. 11 and 12. Awesome. Okay, stretch up over your head as high as you possibly can. And then even higher than that. And over to one side. Over to the other. All right, awesome. Thank you so much. You can sit. This is science, folks. You will learn better, you will remember better because the blood is flowing in your body now. Your heart is pumping. This is good. And so now you can't say that you didn't get anything out of my talk because you got exercise. So a few years ago now, I tweeted this. Here are the only reasonable options for authentication in apps. Use a cloud provider for auth, have a team dedicated to auth for a company's apps, or use HTTP basic auth because security clearly doesn't matter that much for you anyway. And I think at the time, I actually was building a couple like small side projects that were using HTTP basic auth. I was totally wrong about this because a few months later, as I was getting excited about Remix, I watched a live stream from my friend Ryan Florence where he implemented authentication. It just hand-rolled his own thing. And I was shocked at how straightforward it was. I remember implementing Auth years ago with Express and Passport, and it was pretty okay, but I was also doing OAuth and a bunch of other stuff that was like an enormous pain. And when I was at PayPal, we did have teams that were responsible for authentication, and I just thought, like, this is just too big of a thing to hand roll your own. And then I saw Ryan do what he was doing, and I was like, that's not too bad. And at the time, I was building my own website, and I decided to hand roll my own auth. So today we're going to hand roll our own auth in the 30 minutes or so that I have with you. And I want to show you what it is like in using the modern web features or even like old web features and modern tools to hand roll your own auth. And it's actually pretty stellar. It's awesome. And we're going to be using an example called Remix Jokes. This is a mini app that allows users to submit their own jokes, and they need to authenticate, of course, and so we're going to build out the authentication for that. We're going to be using Prisma. How many of you are using Prisma as your ORM? I'm actually really surprised how few hands went up. Prisma is amazing. So I love Prisma, and we'll get a little view into what it's like to create a data model and do authentication with Prisma today. And then Remix, of course. How many of you have used Remix? Yeah, just about the same number of hands. Well, next year, there are a lot more hands are going to go up, I promise. So that's it. That's pretty much all of this, the prepared slides that I have. The rest of this is us coding together and you yelling at me when I get something wrong. You missed a semicolon. not in JavaScript. Okay, so let me get the app running. And that did not work. Uh-oh. Oh, I'm in the wrong directory. I do need to be in that directory, though, so we're going to... Here, let's do this. We'll open up a new thing. We'll cd into that directory. Okay. Great. So... Oh, and I restarted my computer. Sorry about that. Localhost 8000 is where we're at. Remix jokes. Hooray! So right now the app, it has jokes that were seeded into the database, and so we can look at some of these. I'll bump that up so you can read the hilarity. My first time using an elevator was an uplifting experience. The second time let me down. And these are all just as hilarious as that. We can get random jokes. Why don't skeletons ride roller coasters? They don't have the stomach for it. Okay, so we're going to start out by creating our data model for users. The way that this works is in this playground app, and I should bump that up even more. We have this app directory, and this is where all of our app code lives. Both the server and the client will all be in this directory. And the Prisma configuration is in the Prisma directory, and this is where we have our Prisma schema. And then we have the seed script that seeds our database once we've changed our schema or whatever, anytime we want to reset the database or whatever for our development. And we're using SQLite, so there's our database right there. By the way, SQLite is amazing. It is not just for toys. SQLite is fantastic. Anyway, that's what we're going to be using for this project. So we have a model for our jokes. Let's make a model for our users. And so we're going to have some of the same things that our joke does. I have an ID created at, updated at. We're going to have a username. And then the user also needs to have a password and the list of jokes for that particular user. So we're going to have a password field. But when I first started doing this, I actually would just say it's a string. So this is maybe my password hash. But you don't actually want to do this. You want to actually have the password as a separate model. And the reason that you want to separate it as a model of its own is because you don't want people who are querying the user table to accidentally get the password hashes and accidentally send that off to the front end. Like, what a disaster that would be. Of course, I've never done that myself. No, this is experience. I have done that, but not at PayPal. I never did that at PayPal. So your money is safe, hopefully. So yeah, for our password model, we're going to have the hash, but then in our configuration, we need to associate the password to the user. So we're going to have a user ID, and this is going to be a string, and then we'll have the user, which is a user, and thank you, Copilot, for completing that for me. But we also want to have on delete, so when the user is deleted, we'll cascade that delete. Cascade, there we go. And then on update, also cascade. Okay, great. Here, so you can see more of that. So now we have our password as a separate table in our database. We're also going to add a jokes relationship. So we'll say jokes, and this is jokes, or a joke. It's a joke model, array of those things. And we'll do the same thing for our jokes that we did for our password to establish that relationship. Except this one, I think it'd be more fun if we call it a jokester, because, I don't know, jokester, right? Isn't that more fun? Don't you have fun when you're programming? Like, do you ever just name things, funny things? Ryan does, and then now we have this thing called a fetcher in when we in Remix, and when we want to get rid of the stale ones or the old ones or whatever, we have a function called remove crusty old fetchers. So there you go. Have fun. So long as it's named like sensibly and consistently, I think that is good. So now we're going to update our database, and I'm not here to teach you how to do database migrations. I'm assuming you probably already have a user model, or when you're building your app in the first place, you're probably going to assume that you're going to have users. So I'm not going to teach you about migrations. We're just going to reset everything from the get-go. So we'll say Prisma db push, and yes, we want to reset all the data. And then before we go to like actually run the seed, our seed script is going to be wrong because it's trying to add a joke that doesn't have a jokester. And so let's make a jokester. Our jokester is going to be called Cody, and we're going to await prisma.user.create. And the data for this user will have a username called Cody, and a password will be created. So a relation, like again, this is a separate table, so we're going to create a password that's related to this user. And the hash is going to need to be created somehow. So let's create that hash really quick. We're going to import bcrypt from bcrypt.js. And this is kind of interesting. So bcrypt's security comes in how slow it is, which I just think is really interesting. And just that it's difficult to brute force through bcrypt because it's just so slow to process. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting fun fact. So we're going to hash our password, and our password is going to be Twix Rocks for our seed script here. So we'll create a hash with 10 iterations to just make it more difficult to read back from the hash. And we'll stick that in for the password for Cody. And then down here, we'll say our joke is all of that joke data plus the jokester ID, which is Cody.id. So now we can run npx prisma dbseed, which will run our seed script for us and get the database all set up for us. Great. So now, if we do still have the server running, so we can come back over here. Everything is still working. These are the same. They look like the same jokes, but they actually have the user ID or the jokester ID on there. So what do we do next? Well, now we need to make this login page work. So I didn't show you this earlier, but we have a login screen where we can give our username and password. And if I try to provide those, Twix Rocks, of course, that's not implemented yet because that's what we're doing. And so wouldn't it be nice if your job was already done? You're like, wow, it's finished already. No, we got to implement something. So this is our login route. And this is all server code. So I'm going to come down here and you'll see like, whoa, that's React code. That's like front-end stuff. No. This actually server renders, so it is technically server code. But also, this same file will run, has this action function, which only runs on the server. So this is running in Node or Cloudflare Workers or Akamai Edge Workers or wherever other JavaScript environment you can run in, this will run in that. And so what we need to do is when the user is submitting their login form, we need to go log the user in. And I think it's sensible to put that in a separate file. We could put it all right here, but I'm going to stick it in our utils, and we'll have this session.server.ts. So this is server-only code right here. And we need an async function we'll export called login, and that has a username and a password. And oh, by the way, TypeScript. So yeah. Wow, okay, what is that? Nope, not pretty close. Man, Copilot? How many of you are using Copilot? This is not an advertisement, but holy smokes. Like, this thing is out of this world, but I'm not going to let Copilot do my job for me. Not yet, robots. Okay, username, string, password, string. So now we have the username and password. We need to go to the database to get the user, and we're going to get their password hash, and then we're going to compare the password to make sure that those two are the same. So our user is, here, we'll call this the user with password, so we don't accidentally send the password along. And so we'll say, await Prisma user find unique. Yeah, nice try, Copilot. Oh, right, actually, we're going to bring in DB from our server. So this is our client that we have for our app. And it's find unique, where the username is what has been provided. And also we want to include the password. And actually, we don't want the whole password. I don't care about the other stuff in the password. So we'll just say the hash true. So we're going to just get the password field that has a hash property on it. But it's very possible. Oh, you know what? This happened yesterday. Didn't it? Yep, this happened yesterday, and now I'm trying to remember why that happened. Shoot. We might have to skip to a separate project that I had set up for me, really. But let me just try one thing really quick. Prisma generate. There we go. Yep, it worked. Magic. Okay, it was just yeah. Thank you. Oh, no. Oh, failure. Shoot. And now I did totally forget what I did wrong. So we're going to just go to, let's see, dev. Let me see what step we're on. Login, or yeah, 2, I think. And that is not going to like that either. Oh, right, I'm in the wrong thing. Node dev 2. Okay, cool. So yeah, now we're on port 8002. Hey, look, it looks the same. So pretend that everything worked and that I didn't forget what I was doing. Okay. Okay, so we'll come into node 2. Everything looks the same. And we're in our utils. And we're going to make our session server.ts. And actually, let's copy what we had so far so we don't have to type all that out again. Okay, cool. We're right back where we were. Ta-da! So, what the devil? Shoot. This is unfortunate. Let's see what that does. Okay, we'll just go with that. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so now we have the user with password. It's very possible that there is no user with this username in the database. And so it's possible that user with password will be null. So if we say user with password, so if there's not a user with the password, if there's no user that came back, then we'll return null. It's also technically possible that there's no password field on that user. So if there's also no user with password.hash, then we'll also return null. And actually, password could be null as well. So we'll return null in that case as well. All right, so now we can assume that we have a user and that user has a password. So now we can compare the passwords. And we're going to need bcrypt to do this comparison. So import bcrypt from bcrypt.js. And we'll await bcrypt.compare. And we're going to compare the password to the user's password hash that we have from the database. And this will determine whether it is valid. And if it's not, then we'll return null here as well. We don't need to explain why it was wrong. Like, oh, there was no user in the database. Or the password was wrong. Like, we don't need to tell them that. They don't need to know. Although, fun fact, they actually could find out. And if you know how they could find out with this code, then good on ya. But it actually doesn't really matter that much anyway, in practical terms. But if you know why, come talk to me later, and I'll give you a high five. Okay, cool. So now we can assume that the user password combination, username and password combination is correct, so we can actually return the user. But you don't want to return the user with the password. We want to get the user and not the password. So we're going to separate those two things. We'll take the password, pluck that off. We'll rename it to _password just to say, hey, I don't want to use this variable. That's just a convention. That doesn't matter. And then we'll take the rest of the properties and get the user. If you're using Lodash, this is just pick. But I'm not using Lodash, so we're just picking it like that. Okay, cool. So now we have a user, just has the ID created at and username. We're solid. So with that in mind, or all implemented, we can go into our login again and come on down here and log in to get the user. So our user is await login. I'm going to pull that in from our session server, pass the username and password. And now if there's not a user, then they messed up. They're bad. They entered something wrong. So we say username or password incorrect. Otherwise, we're going to stick with not implemented yet. Let's just make sure that piece works. And actually, while we're at it, let's console log our user. And the console log, again, this is running on the server. So this is going to be our terminal output. It will not be in the browser. So now we go to whatever, submit. Username or password is incorrect. We get user is null right there. But if I enter Cody and Twix rocks, this is also not an ad for Twix, by the way. I just like Twix. I don't know, like sometimes when I say that I like things, people somehow think that I am somehow financed by that thing. There's some ulterior motive. I'm pretty like genuine, but yeah, I don't know. Not a Twix advertisement. I'm not a one-wheel advertisement. I am not, I just like these things. I'm not a GitHub Copilot advertisement, whatever. Okay, so there's our user. We've got the user information, so that's good. And they're not passing along the password, which is also good. So now what we need to do is we're going to use cookies because cookies are the most secure mechanism for authentication. You're storing JOTs in local storage. It's not really terribly bad, but it's also not very good at all, because third-party scripts and other cross-site scripting vulnerabilities can grab that token right out of your local storage. It's not a very safe place to keep that stuff. So we're going to stick it in a cookie. We're going to make it HTTP only so that it's nice and safe. And we're also going to serialize it and encode it with a session secret. So let's get our session secret out of our process env, which we already have set up for ourselves. And we'll say if there's no session secret, then we'll throw a new error. It says session secret is not set. Okay, so with that session secret, now we're going to make, actually this is the API that Ryan was working with. He was documenting when he did that live stream, and I was like, oh, that's not all that hard. We're going to create a cookie session storage. So here's our storage. Oh, you got to spell it right. Const storage. There we go. And we're going to configure how our cookie is going to be serialized and managed here. So the name of our cookie is going to be remixjokes_session. You can call this whatever you want, as long as it's consistent, doesn't really matter. We'll have a max age of, I don't know, let's do 1,000 milliseconds times 60. Yeah, sure, a week. Thanks, Copilot. And then we'll say secure is true. We'll say HTTP only is true. And there's another property that I'm forgetting. Oh yeah, path. We'll just make it for the whole site. Okay, great. So now we have a mechanism for setting values in our cookie. And what we need now is to export a function that is create user session. And this will take our user ID as a string. And also we're going to take a redirect to, which will be a string. So where we want the user to go once we've created this session. And so now we're going to get our session from storage get session. This is actually async because you can implement your own implementation of session storage. You could have it stored in a Redis, or you could have it stored in Postgres. For me, I actually do store it in Postgres. I have a session table, and that way on my website, I can have on your profile page, it says how many sessions you have active on various devices, and you can sign out of all of those sessions all at once. My website is overscoped. Not over-engineered, it's overscoped. So we're just storing everything in the cookie, so we're going to get the session. And this will create a new session for us, because if we're creating a new user session, we don't need to get that out of the request or anything. We don't care about the existing session. So then we'll say our session set user ID is whatever the user ID we're provided. So this is the user ID that will be stored in the cookie. And then we're going to return a redirect. So this redirect is coming from remix run node as well. And this is just a small utility that Remix provides that makes it so that you don't have to do return new response null, and then you get it like a location header, all that garbage. We don't want to do all that. So the redirect just makes it so we don't have to do that. So we'll redirect to the redirect to. But important piece here is we need to set the headers and a set cookie header to set our cookie. And we're going to await storage dot, you gotta spell it right though, storage dot, no, you really gotta spell it. It does not work if you spell it wrong. I mean, it would work if you spelled it wrong, like referrer, anybody, but it's gotta be consistent. That's the important part. So we're gonna commit the session, and that will serialize our cookie, and that sends that header along to the browser. The browser will set it in its own cookie storage. Okay, cool. So now we come back over here, and instead of returning a bad request, we're going to return a good one. Or, hooray, you're logged in now. So create user session, and we'll pass the user ID and redirect to user.id. There we go. Great. You want to test this? I don't mean like automated tested, like the way you should be writing this stuff. I mean like manual tested, like the way that we used to do stuff before we cared. Okay, so going back to our, hold on a second, where is my, here we go. We want application tab. Okay, because we're going to look in, oh, spoiler alert, that was from me practicing earlier. No cookie. There's no cookie in here. So we're going to look, go for coding, here actually, let's do it wrong here first. Okay, still username and password is incorrect, and now Twix rocks. And boom, there's our cookie. Hooray! Yeah, it works. Cool, so our cookie's sitting in there. And so now if we want to add our own, this is on the jokes/new URL. So that's the route that we're working in. We have a form there. We want to make a joke about milk or something, like whatever. And we hit add, and that's going to blow up. Oh, sorry, light mode. Sorry about that. This is because we haven't actually updated that code to handle the Jokester ID. So let's go do that. And here, let me get rid of that light mode. Sorry about that. Surprise! Okay, so we'll go to the routes jokes new. And we've got a TS-expect error, but we're going to get that error. We want to handle that. And so we need to get the user ID out of the session. And that session is in the request. So let's go back over to our session server where we're dealing with this session. We're going to export a function called get, or you know what? We don't want anybody to create a joke who doesn't have a user ID, right? So instead of get user ID, we're going to say require user ID. Because if it's not there, then we want to redirect them to the login. And so we're going to take the request that is making this request to do something. It's a request. And then we're going to actually also take a redirect to, which will be a string. And that's where we send them after they have logged in. So our login page has a feature that'll let them, once they log in, they'll go right back to where they were before. And so we'll actually default this redirect to a new URL of the request.url. And we'll get the path name. So basically what this default is saying is, or what require user ID is saying is, hey, give me the request. And if you don't specify a redirect to, then I'm just going to redirect them back to whatever that request URL was. So that's like most of the time that's what you want. And so that's why we're going to do that default there. So now it's, no. I want to type this out, Copilot. So we're going to, sometimes Copilot's really helpful, even in talks like this, but not right now. So we're going to get our session from await storage get session, and we're going to get this from the cookie that's in the request. So now we're not making a new session, we're going to get the existing session. So we'll say request.headers.get. Yes, thank you, Copilot, but I want to capitalize it because I don't know why. It doesn't matter, but fun fact, by the way, this request is not like a express request. It's not a Fastly or Fastly. I get Fastly and Fastify mixed up, but whichever one that is not what that request. This is a web fetch request. You dive into the TypeScript definitions and everything, it's web fetch. That's the one thing that Remix does for you, is it normalizes all the platforms, whether you're shipping to Netlify or Vercel or doing your own Express thing in a Docker container, whatever you're doing, Remix normalizes everything to the web platform. I like to call it the jQuery of Node. So we are going to get our session out of that cookie, and we'll get our user ID from the session. So the happy path here is the user logged in. We created a brand new session. We set the user ID into the session. That gets serialized into our cookie. And then when they make this request, we're going to deserialize it with our cookie storage from the cookie that is given, and we'll get the user ID out of that. That's how that all is working. So if there's not a user ID, then we're going to redirect them. If there is, then we're going to return the user ID. Okay? So how we redirect them is we want to send them to that redirect to, but we're going to send them to the login, and that login will have a query string on it for where they want to be redirected to after they've finished logging in. So we'll get our search params for a serialized search params for that login page. Say URL search params. We'll have a redirect to. There we go. And then we'll return a redirect to login and then search params. There we go. Cool. And so now in our new .tsx here, when we're creating a new joke, we're going to get our user ID from await require user ID with this request. We're not going to pass a redirect to. I'm happy with redirecting them back to this form. So then we'll come down here. We'll take all the fields that they've submitted, the name and the content, and we're going to add the Jokester ID, which is the user ID of whatever user is making this request. And yeah, we're done. We could do registration, but we're not going to bother with that. But let me show you to make sure that it actually does work. So I'm going to make a new joke, milk. And milk is also the fastest liquid on Earth. It's past your eyes before you even see it. Haha, there's a groan. Yeah, so there you go. That totally worked. And what if we're not logged in? If we're not logged in, then I say, here's my thing, and here's my other thing, and it blows up. We could add, sorry, I should have given you a light mode warning. It blows up because we haven't actually added any proper error handling, but the fact is that it is there. Actually, it just occurred to me that we should have been redirected, and we weren't, and I don't know why. So here, I do have a couple extra minutes, so we'll debug this together. We've got an array.join. Where is that? Yeah, that's down in Prisma land. I'm not going to figure it out. If anybody knows what's going on, then let me know. It worked when I was practicing, so I promise it does work. There we go. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so just to wrap things up, I just want to review a couple of things. First of all, the most simple and secure web auth requires HTTP-only cookies, period. I know that for a long time, client-side devs, we've been doing JOTs and local storage. That's actually how I got my start in authentication when I was doing web dev, was JOTs and local storage, and I thought it was the bee's knees. It was really cool and whatever. But no, the most simple and secure is HTTP-only cookies. And the best user experience for dynamic content requires server-based auth. You cannot just do client-based auth. You do client-based auth, and now you have spinners before the user can see anything. That's not a good user experience. Let them generate that HTML on the server. Server rendered the thing. Way better user experience. And if you want to server render it with dynamic content, you have to have server-based auth. Remix gives us nice, simple utilities for authentication. So I actually really want to call this out specifically. Some of you might be looking at this and being like, wow, Rails was a lot easier, or whatever. Like I just like enter two things and poof, I have authentication. And that's great. What I really like about this is that it is relatively simple and it's your code. And so as you need to, as requirements change, you can change this. And for me, I feel myself making changes to code a lot more than I feel myself making new projects. And so the speed at which I can create new projects and whatever is less important to me than the adaptability of code. I think adaptability is very important. And so I like the way that this works with the simple utilities that we can utilize to implement our own authentication. Now, and I should also mention that there's a community member named Sergio who is amazing, and if you spend any time in the Remix community, you will, like 5 minutes, and you will probably meet Sergio because he's helping people all the time. But he wrote a library called Remix Auth, and if you're doing OAuth or anything like that, then I actually recommend using that. But for something like this, I think hand-rolling it yourself is pretty reasonable to do. And one other thing. All of this had no JavaScript in the browser the whole time. We had nothing, no JavaScript running in the browser. That's fun and interesting. It's like a party trick. But what's really why this matters is because if you are a backend dev and you want to do a little UI, but you're like, that is the worst because UI is awful, and we have to do like there's so many complex stuff. You got your Redux and your MobX and your whatever. If that is you, then I have good news for you. Because I can do this without JavaScript in the browser, I'm not saying that you can do it with JavaScript disabled. I mean, you can, but what this means is it's actually really simple to do JavaScript in the browser because you don't have to manage any state. This is proof that you don't need to manage state when you're in the browser when you're using Remix. And that's pretty significant. So, yeah, there you go. I just have one last thing to say to you. And that is, you are priceless. Thank you very much.